Hi guys, and welcome back to another digital painting tutorial where we will be going over this fantasy landscape featuring a portal. This tutorial is quite long, so if you are proficient enough in Procreate, by all means feel free to increase the speed of this video. Alright, with that said, let's begin. First, we want to click onto the Actions button, go to Canvas, down to Canvas Information. Here is where you can title your work and also sign your name if you so choose. The dimensions that I'm using for this project are 3,800 square pixels by 5,000 square pixels at 300 dpi. And the color profile of which I'm using is one of the defaults, which is second from the top of the options available. While I don't have the exact colors that I used for this piece, if you go down in the description, I do put the most frequently used colors as a sort of guide to the palette of which I worked from. This darker color is the first color that we'll be using as the base for our painting. So first let's go into our layers. If I turn layer 1 on, you'll see that that is my sketch. I'm going to rename it as sketch so that way I know where it is. I'm also going to slide to the left and hit lock. This ensures that I don't mess up my sketch. Next, I'm going to hit the plus sign and add a layer, which is layer 2. Move that layer below the sketch. I fill the background color on layer 2 by just grabbing the color that I first selected and slide it on over to the canvas. I hit the plus sign once again to add a new layer, which is now layer 3, and I select a significantly darker version of the color we've already established using. Going into my brush library, I select the airbrush and the medium hard airbrush, and I paint the area. I realize that I need to increase the size as well as the opacity to get more out of the brush that I'm using. I go into my adjustments, I go to the Gaussian blur, I blur, and then I now hit the transform tool, make sure I'm on freeform, and I just slide the top down a little bit so it only takes up a little less than 1/3 of the piece. Next, on layer 4, I'm going to select this brighter green. It's like it's close to mint. It's like a mint color. And I'm going to just enlarge the brush I'm using under airbrush. Once I sort of get the shape I want, I go back into adjustments. I go to Gaussian blur and blur it out. Next, on a new layer, I think about what I'm going to do. And then I grab an even brighter version of the color I was just working in. And then I start coloring in the area with this lighter color. Once I like where it is, I do Gaussian blur again. And now I have the 4 layers that I like, and I pinch them together so they are all on one layer. So now we have our foundational canvas, if you will. Next, we're going to hit the plus sign, and now we're reassigned a new layer 3. Next, we'll be working on these trees on the side. With the color selected, it's the one from the background there. We're going to just slide over to the oranges that also have brown, and I'm going to try and stay close to the color, but take out some of the vibrancy. And now we're going to the leather wood brush, my apologies. And as you know, if you've been with me for a while on my tutorials, I love to use leather wood for bark on trees because it has a really lovely texture that you can build up to look a lot like bark. So here I am establishing the first foundational layer of our tree. It's super exhilarating, I know. And now that I feel like I have a decent base down, I take off my sketch so that I can see if there are any areas that I need to paint better or rework. And so that's what I'm doing now, making sure I get the details as consistent as possible. All right, and now we have our first tree. So that was layer 3. We're going to use the selection tool. Make sure we are on freehand. And I'm going to select the top of the tree as well as the bottom of the tree as well. Next, I'm going to use feather. And I'm going to feather out the selection a little bit. So that way, our next move will not have two sharp lines. We're going to go into hue, saturation, and brightness under adjustments, and we're going to take the brightness down as well as some of the saturation. This creates a shadow for us that we don't have to paint in, but one we can easily paint with now. I hold down and select the darker color that we have just established. I put layer 3 on alpha lock so that way anything I do paint stays within the actual layer that we're painting on. And so I can easily draw without worrying about going outside of the line, so to speak. Here you can see me just putting down the color. I'm not worrying too much about how it looks because I will be building up the bark for a little while. Okay, and now that I've sort of established a shadow versus the front side, we're going to work on adding the other trees. There and there. So next I want to add a new layer. We'll see how long it takes me. Okay, so I select layer 2 and then hit the plus sign. So that way layer 4 is under layer 3, but on top of layer 2. Selecting the color tool, I know that I want the background trees to be slightly darker than that background color you see there. So I grab one of the colors from the gradient that we have at the bottom. And then I go into my brushes, make sure I'm on leatherwood. Resize the brush to be on the smaller side just because the details will be smaller because the trees are further back in the distance. As I did with the first tree, I'm just getting my base color and base shape down using the leatherwood brush. Now when I take off my sketch, I can see what things need work. So there's definitely some adjustments that I decide to make here on the trunk of this tree. In order to erase here, I use the Inka brush, which comes with the Procreate app. I overdo it a bit and then I fix it. And that helps keep texture, but also gives nice clean erase lines. Erased lines, you know what I mean. All right, and now that I like the way that that looks, what I'm going to do to save myself just a little bit of time is I'm actually going to add a layer that I'm not going to end up using for a while, so pretend that didn't happen. Then I'm also going to go back to layer 4, maybe. I think I'm thinking about it. I'm going to go back to layer 4. I'm just going to keep saying that until it happens. There we go, back to layer 4, and I'm going to duplicate it by sliding to the left and deciding, no, not deciding, selecting duplicate. Woo, words are hard today. Now, I'm going to resize using the transform tool and the freeform and making it just slightly more slender of a tree since it is further back by a bit. And I'm erasing the details that I don't need because I also want the trees to feel independent of one another and not just a copy and paste. So now that I've erased the top of the tree so the details are not identical, now I go in and I paint the individual details. All right, so now that I like the way that that looks, I'm going to go into my layers. I'm going to combine layer, I think 4 and 6, because I can't see. And now that says layer 4, I'm going into selection, and I'm going to do the same thing I did to create shadow for the front tree, the foreground tree. So I'm just creating selected areas. Once I have them selected, go into feather, turn up the feathering just a little bit, go into the adjustments, and now I'm going to adjust the brightness and the saturation. Now that I'm done, I notice that the trees have some areas that need some touching up, so I go back in with the same dark color, and I'm just making sure that there are no areas that are missing paint. Now I'm going to go back in my layers. I'm going to put that layer onto Alpha Lock so that I can paint on it without worrying about getting outside the lines. I'm going to make sure I'm still in my leatherwood brush so that I continue to keep that bark-like texture. And just slowly work my way up the tree, but not trying to overdo the highlights because we haven't yet established exactly where our light is going to be coming from. We're just giving it a generic upgrade, okay? Once we like the way these trees look, we are going to combine layer 3 and 4, and now it's labeled layer 4. We're going to select layer 5, which is blank, grab the darkest color that we have at the bottom of this canvas, and now we're going to go into our brush library, down to organics, down to cotton, and then we're going to make the brush bigger, and we're going to use this as the suggestive texture of leaves for the trees at the top here. However, it is rather dark, so in a moment we are going to make sure that we add in some color variation. But first, we need to make sure that we add a new layer on top. So now that's considered layer 5 as well. We'll deal with that in a moment. It might take a couple tries to get the brush stroke exactly the way that you want it. Here I play with the blending modes. Don't do it because I end up putting it back to normal anyways in a moment. So just hang out with me. On the bottom layer, I take the opacity down, and I take the opacity down on this brighter layer as well, but I also make sure that it's on normal blending mode, and then I combine the two layer 5s. On top of layer 4, I add a new layer, which automatically labels it as layer 5. So I go back into the bottom layer that says it's layer 5 and make that a 3. Just so that way now it says layer 2, 3, 4, and 5 from the bottom to the top there. You can absolutely take the time to rename your layers however you would like. This is just what I'm using for this particular project. Right now we're going to start working on this waterfall in the background. So I select a very light green gray color on the whiter side. And I use the brush Twig in the brush library under organics. Or is it organic? Either way, I think you guys know what I mean. Plus there's a picture. Well, it's a video. I'm not too worried about how this looks in terms of perfect lines or anything like that. I'm just trying to get colors placed where I want them and trying to stay as vertical in my lines as possible. And I make sure that I add some color variation to one side so that we get the idea that part of this waterfall is more in shadow than the other side. Now I'm going into adjustments. I'm going to motion blur, and motion blur works wherever you are moving. So if you move your hand from top to bottom, it's going to be vertical. If you move from left to right or diagonal, that's where the motion of the blur will occur. So I tried to get mine vertical. I messed up a little, so I had to use the transform tool. But then I go in with the Gaussian blur, and now look at that water. Looks a little bit more natural than when it was perfectly straight up and down through the motion blur. So now we have some major components established for this piece. Here's the sketch again. So we're going to add a new layer, which is now layer 6, and we're going to start our portal arch. I want to make sure I grab a very dark, almost black color. And we're going to grab the airbrush, the hard airbrush at the bottom there, and we're going to, keep the size relatively small while I get the shape that I want down from this. It's not, my sketch is a little off, so I do end up adjusting my painting a little bit in a moment here, but for the most part, I've got it the way I want it. I use a slightly lighter color just so I can see the shape of the arch a little bit easier. Even though I do plan on painting on top, it just helps me keep the structure in my mind a little bit easier. All right, so now I'm going into the transform tool and I have it on distort, and I'm just dragging down the one side where I just feel like my composition was a little off. It was just a little off. So then I also grab this side of the arch and I use freeform and stretch the side down a little bit as well. And then I just end up going in, and there's a little separation there. So I just paint where it had separated when I made that move. Selecting layer 5, I hit the plus sign, so now layer 7 is under layer 6. And now we are going for a very festive bright orange. I promise. It looks fine by the end. It's going to be very ugly at first, okay? It's not going to look good. Look at that. Gross, right? No. I promise it gets a lot prettier in time. And this is nothing against the color orange. It just does not look good in this piece right now. Now I put it on alpha lock and I pick a brighter, lighter orange to try it. Yeah, it's more yellow, but then I also am like, no, it's got to be even whiter. So I just am continuing to build up this inner glow. I duplicate the layer just because I felt like it was needing just more solidity. There we go. I can say words. I'm just touching up this area, but I'll be touching up pieces throughout this entire thing anyways. I don't know why I put so much effort there. Now I'm just touching up more where I didn't fully color in the arch. So now we have the arch. Look at that, guys. Hit the plus signs. Now we got a layer 8 on top of layer 6. And we're going to do the top of the arch and start establishing some light. Just kidding, we're going to do the light first instead of the top of the arch. So we're going to layer 5, adding a new layer. I believe it ends up being layer 7. I'm going to a very nice, vibrant, like mint color and the medium blend under the airbrush. I'm going to the add blend mode. And then now I'm going to start adding in some light from above. The vibrancy may not be fully being picked up on the camera, so me doing the Gaussian blur may not make sense to you, but it does come up in person. So now that I have this established, I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to do the hard airbrush, and I'm going to make some beams of light. For some reason, I literally was struggling to think of those words, but that's what I'm doing here. I'm making beams of light. Don't worry, we're going to make them stand out even more soon. All right, once I like this, I go back into my layers and I put it on add blending mode. So as you can see, it gets a lot more vibrant. So I do take the opacity down a bit because I don't want it to be too distracting. So now I'm going to, on that layer, go into Gaussian blur and blur it so that the lines are not too perfect. And then I can combine those layers together. And I do duplicate them. And then I figure out the opacity on the second layer. And there we go. Now on that layer, I am going in with the eraser and making sure that the light does not overlap with any of the areas I don't want it to. Specifically the tree. I didn't want it to, I wanted it to go more behind that tree, or at least the backside, hitting the backside of the tree. So now we can start adding in more light detail because now we know exactly where the lights are hitting. On layer 10 here, we are going to make it an add, and it's also on a clipping mask. And we are going to paint along the edge where the beams of light hit the harshest. We're going to do that here as well. All right, and now we're also going to take the time to do the foreground tree. And to help so that it isn't too overwhelming in the color, I just use the smudge tool to help smudge it out and just soften it a bit. And then once I have that established, I do grab the mint green color that we're using here. And I'm just making sure that I tie in some of that color to this tree as well. All right, now we are going to tackle the top of the arch. So now we're going to the layer above the arch, which is layer 8, assuming my eyesight is not failing me too poorly right now. All right, so I want there to be almost like moss and vines. Um, so I'm going to use this rainforest brush. I'm going to show you how I amend it. So first I reset it. Now I swipe and duplicate it. And I like to make sure the jitter is good and the spacing as well. Now you can kind of get an idea if you draw it horizontally, you can kind of see how it's going to behave. I go into dynamics and I turn up the jitter sizing difference so that way we're getting a nice variety so it feels more organic. And now I'm going to start building up the moss. I am grabbing colors that are all within like the same vicinity of one another, analogous colors, if you will. Maybe a couple monochromatic colors too. Now we're going to punch it up. We're really going to go for it here. And this isn't even as bright as it gets. But this is where we start making that delineation from moss to moss. It's okay if you don't understand it. You'll understand by the end of the video, hopefully. Probably. All right, and now that we have the basic moss down, right, the generic moss established, we're going to take it up a notch. We're going to add layer 10. We are going to put it on add. Add is very much one of my favorite blending tools to use in order to create some really nice highlights and really vibrant colors for lighting. We want to make sure that we're being mindful of the layers that we're currently building up in the moss, and specifically with this lighting, you don't want everything to be one solid color. So you want to try and build the moss so that it looks like there's shadows and midtones and various colors coming through. So and you also don't want it to be it's the word I'm thinking of, too organized, because then it'll stop looking natural. So we want it to be as natural as possible. If you don't know what it looks like, there's so many good moss references out there on the interwebs. Case in point, we're going to grab some really vibrant, like green color, and we're going to build some of that in now. But we don't want to do too much, just enough to be eye-catching, but not enough to be overwhelming. And now we're going to add fungus mushrooms. We're adding mushrooms. Takes me a really long time to get this brush at exactly the right size. I apologize for that. It was painful for me to watch, so I imagine it was even more painful for you. Here I'm adding some just suggestion of, maybe some vines. We'll add more soon though, don't worry. I sped this part up for you a little bit. Just I figured you guys really don't need to see this take any slower than necessary. Tell me if I'm wrong though. If you want me to slow it down next time, I will. Look at this cute little cluster of mushrooms. And now, on layer 12, we're going to put it on add. We're going to pick that nice bright color. Now, you're going to make the mushroom stand out even more. For a lot of these smaller and fine details of this piece, and any piece, be sure to zoom in and out like I'm doing here. This allows us to tell whether or not the details are registering and if there are any adjustments that we need to make to the lighting or the colors. All right, and once we're done adding these details, we're going to go into our layers. We're going to go to the layer that is the arch, and we're going to take the eraser to just start creating, just a little bit of divots here and there so that we are starting to see some stone-like shapes. Now I'm using the smudge tool, the hard airbrush, and that's just to help soften up the edges a little bit because I feel that the edges are uh, just too stark, and so I think they end up being really distracting to the eye. So I just wanted to soften them up a bit. I also do this on the inside edge of the portal as well. And here you'll see that I'm trying to combine layers that can combine well together, just so that I have enough layers I don't have to worry about later when it starts getting angry with me and being like, you don't have layers left. Selecting the top layer, I hit the plus sign to add a layer on top. In color tools here, I select a color that is a little bit more saturated and darker than the background color. In the brush library, go down to organic and select the brush Paper Daisy. This brush we'll be using to make more defined foliage around the portal. It might take some adjusting the size as well as figuring out how you would like the plant to rest next to the portal. You can tell here that I am rotating and moving things around just so I can really get a good grasp of how this plant is going to sit in the painting. And you'll see me undo, paint again, undo, paint, because I'm determined to get this plant just how I want it. Then I go in with the eraser and I get rid of any parts of the plant that don't serve the painting well. And then I go in and I use the transform tool and the freeform to shrink it down a bit. Once I have the base of the plant down in a way that I like, I go back to that layer, which is layer 10, which I know it's a duplicate, but alpha lock. I pick black, stay on the same brush, I make it a little bit smaller, and then I just tap in that detail. Once I feel good about that, I do go back in and take off alpha lock and I move it down. And I do that because this layer above it, the other layer 10, is an add blending mode, which means anything I paint will be adding light to it. So this is where I am utilizing that layer and what the blending mode does. Now that I like how that looks, I'm going in and I'm grabbing more of a green color. There we go. And making sure I'm on the original plant layer, putting it on Alpha Lock. I will go into the brush library under Artistic. I'm going to show you how I make the Aurora brush amended. So I want to make sure the jitter is on. Here's a good idea of what the brush looks like. I want the spacing where it is. The dynamics, I want there to be quite a different size jitter. And then the color dynamic, I'm going to take these down. The hue, make it quite low, around 3%. I don't want there to be too much color variation. I think it ends up being a little distracting. So then I just tap in the brush just to give some easy leaf details, like additional leaf details that stand out. I unselect Alpha Lock, select layer 6, and hit the plus sign so that I have a layer beneath the plant bush there, but in front of the arch. Under layers, I'm going to combine layer 10 and 11 together, and I make sure to grab the blue from the background color, teal, and get some of that color going in the leaves as well. Under layers, selecting layer 10 again, the one that has the add blending mode. I'm going to utilize that so that I can start adding some additional highlights around the archway. When I feel good about that, I'm going into the archway layer and I'm just going to try and paint in some divots in the stone so it looks like stone more so that the line isn't too perfect. Back under layers, we're going to select layer 11 and then add a layer on top, which also claims it's layer 11. Feel free to be more organized than I am. In the brush library under elements, we're going to select water for the details here. And we're also going to make sure we are on the blending mode add. This will give a nice illusion of some sort of dimensional difference between our fantasy landscape and the other fantasy landscape through the portal. Once I have my portal water lines established, I grab an airbrush and I just draw along the bottom to help further push the illusion of a delineation between the fantasy world and the portal world. I do this by continuing to highlight the lighting around the entrance of the portal. And I think this just further sells the lighting and the fantasy. And at this point, I realize that I need to fix the inside part of the portal. So we're going to grab with the selection tool this area. And I use the feather, go into the adjustments for the hue, saturation, and brightness. And I do take it down and also change the color so that it's not as harsh of a line as it transitions from the orange to the brick or stone. You know what I mean. I also go into the eraser, pick the medium blend, and just erase the line that stands out just a little too much. Now that I feel mostly satisfied with the way that looks, I'm going to add a layer on top of layer 6 that's now layer 12. And I am going to, it's like a beige creamsicle. We'll call it creamsicle. And we're just drawing a line down the side to just help give more dimension to this particular part, so we see that there is a brick there, but also don't overemphasize it. At this point, I start to realize that I need to duplicate the portal background. So I go to layer 7, duplicate, and then I pinch those together and combine them. Just because I could see some of the background color coming through. You may not need to do that. I also do that with the arch as well. On layer 7, I am going to add a layer by hitting the plus sign and then selecting a clipping mask. On this clipping mask, this is where the adventure begins in us creating the other side of the portal. I'm using the hard airbrush, and I do have the opacity down, and I'm just trying to get the shape of the forefront trees established. And I decide that the color is not vibrant enough, so I do take the saturation up a bit and take the brightness down so it has more of an orange glow. Now I'm going to select the background creamsicle color and slide the color to be a little bit brighter. And on the layer beneath the trees that we just made, but on top of the portal, so it ends up becoming a clipping mask, I end up drawing in these trees. I do put on a blending mode soon because I don't like the color and how it looks almost pink, and we're not looking for pink. So I end up deciding on overlay. And then I proceed on finishing up the trees now that I know the blending mode I would like to be painting in. And then I end up making the opacity on the front trees just a little bit lighter. And then I combine them all into the portal background. You don't have to do that, but I'm just trying to conserve layers. Adding a layer, which ends up being layer 13 on top of the portal and making it a clipping mask, I go into the organic brushes and select the cotton brush so that I can create, similar to the beginning of this tutorial, the tree details and texture for the canopy above. Once I have that established, I do put the blending mode on to multiply and I take down the opacity quite a bit. Now I combine those layers. I add a new layer, which ends up being layer 13 again, and put it on a clipping mask. Under the brush library, go into organic and select the amended rainforest brush. And I use this to start building in the textured floor, ground of the forest in the portal world. At this point, I end up duplicating layer 7, which is the original portal, and I end up doing just a slight Gaussian blur. I just felt the trees were a little bit too defined and were distracting from the other parts of the piece. I also correct the color a little bit here. Once I feel like I have a good idea of how the floor is going to look, I end up combining it to layer 7 and then go to the top layer, layer 11, and select the water effect that we have at the front of the portal here. And I decide that I want to enhance the vibrancy, so I take the brightness up so that it doesn't look so yellow and looks more white, so it stands out against the portal background better. I'm observing my layers and decide that layer 12 can be combined with layer 6. And on layer 7, I'm going to add a new layer on top of it, so it becomes layer 12. Put it on add, selecting a creamsicle-like color, and I'm going to use this layer to really push the lighting of the inner world of the portal. Once I have the texture of the ground more established, I go into the airbrush, select the hard airbrush, and this is where I add some highlights to the trees to just further push the color and where the lighting is in this particular forest. And then for the final touches, we will be going into our brush library. Under artistic, we're going to pick the Aurora brush. And this is where we add some leaves and definition at the top of this piece and on the sides. Then I combine layer 12 with layer 7. Now on layer 6, I'm going to add a plus sign, which makes that the new layer 12. I'm going to the organic brush, and I'm going to start brushing the orange and brown colors into the forest floor of the normal magic world. Like we did in the portal world, I'm trying to build up the color and the texture outside of the portal so that we really get the sense of the light within the portal pushing outside of it and illuminating and interacting with this normal magical world. Then I grab a light teal color, which is compatible with the rest of the background, and start pushing the texture and flooring of this forest. This layer 12 ends up becoming the main layer to painting the forest floor here. I'm just starting to create a sense of a path leading to the portal. Now I want to do the rock side over here by the waterfall. Selecting layer 12, I select the plus sign and add a layer above it. I pick a near black, but still in the same dark teal range. And I use the hard airbrush, put the opacity all the way up so that I can start getting the shape and the silhouette of these rocks, this rock wall, if you will, on the side of the canvas. Once I have it painted in, I select the transform tool and use freeform to get the perspective that I want just right. I erase the bottom so that it's a little bit clearer that it's pushed back into behind the portal closer to the waterfall. I select layer 11 that already has the plant life on it, and this is where I'm going to add more plant life eventually. And I'm doing that with the organic brush, Paper Daisy. Once I like the way that it looks, I put it on a clipping mask. And then I go in with a dark green, still on the same brush, and just tap in some color variation. I end up not liking it, so I use more of the teal colors. There we go. and I think that looks better. I end up choosing the really dark color and just painting it back in to take out some of the intensity. I go back in with this green. I'm really determined to use it. And to take out some of the intensity, I go to the Aurora brush and make sure I select the very dark color that is the original base color and just paint in some of the texture of leaves. Going up to layer 10, which I have on the add blending mode, I select the minty color in the background, and the hard airbrush is now selected, and I'm just going to create some highlights to really push the lighting here so that we know that the light is very focused at the top of this piece and that it's really harshly hitting the greenery up here. It's at this point I decide it's time to add the mist that would be coming off of the waterfall. So I go to layer 13, which is the rocks, and I add a layer, which is now layer 14. I go into brushes, I go down to organic, and then decide, nope, it's in elements, and I grab the cloud brush. I still have the color on the very vibrant and very light colored mint, and I'm just gently tapping it in. I will obviously fix, what I don't like, but I just am trying to get the shape down while still maintaining the texture. At this point, I decide it is time to separate them because I want them to be on different layers for what I want to do. So I'm going to select the right-hand side, copy and paste it. So now I have a copy of that on the one side. I'm going back into the original, which is layer 14, and I'm going to just erase. And now I have the mist on two different layers so that I can bring the mist down beneath the portal so that it is in front of the trees but behind the portal. And now I want to erase just the front tree so that way we get a sense of the depth of this piece. So the mist is not reaching forward, it's in the background. I'm also going to use the Gaussian blur just a touch to take out the intensity. I'm going to go back to this part of the mist, which is layer 14. I'm going to erase where I don't want it to touch. I'm going to select Gaussian blur to take out some of that detail. I want to keep some of it though. Somehow I edited out this next part here, but you can tell that I erased some of the mist at the bottom so that there was like a delineation between the ground and the mist. And on the mist, I am drawing in some of that orange glow that I hoped would be picked up by the portal. Now I'm going to be painting the lighting and the moss for layer 13, which is the rock face there. I end up using Gaussian blur just to take out some of the intensity of the harsh line. Once I have it the way that I like, I am going to go to the bottom where the mist is and hit the smudge tool. Make sure the smudge is on an airbrush. I did the medium hard airbrush, and I'm just softening up the edges where the mist overlaps with it a lot more. Now I'm going to hold down and select one of the green colors from the moss that's growing on top of the arch. And I'm going to use the rainforest brush that's been amended on top of the rock face and start establishing some texture and some lighting. And now I'm going to add additional texture and color dynamic to it by adding lighter limeish olive green on top and just building in more depth and color to this part. Now I'm going to select by holding down and sampling the dark teal color, and then I pick something that's a little bit lighter to add some texture and color variation, because, you know, nature is seldomly one solid flat color, and I just want to get some of that backlighting teal in there. Beneath layer 13, we're going to select layer 12 and hit the plus sign so that we get a layer in between the two. I'm going to select a very mint green again, and I'm going to put it on the add blending mode. And I'm still using the organic rainforest brush. And now I'm starting to create some highlights of where the light would be hitting the moss. Now that I have the lighting behind the rock established, I am going up to layer 10, the very tippy top layer that is add, and I'm going to paint on top of the rock now so that I can start getting in some of that vibrant teal mint color in there as well. Going down to layer 14, which is already on alpha lock, I'm going to add a layer, layer 17, put it on a clipping mask, make sure that I put it on add, and now I'm going to an airbrush. I want to make sure it's the soft blend, and I'm just going to lighten up some of the misty clouds over here. I do end up taking the opacity down just a touch because I felt a little too bright. And then I combine those layers. On that mist layer, I end up smudging the harsh edge here, just softening it. I also go back to the rock there, the rock face, and just smudge the bottom so it's not so harsh of a line. Going back to the mist, I end up softening this line as well by using the smudge tool. Now I want to work on this area down here, which I intend for it to be water. I select the mid-tone teal that we've been using in the background and throughout the piece. Under elements, I select ocean so that I can get some nice watery waves here. Just some little dips and divots, nothing big. Now I'm going to select a brighter color and go back into the airbrush and the hard airbrush so that I can go in with purpose and intent to really lighten up some of the areas to have the water catching light. I also want the ripples around the plant to stand out. Not too much, just enough to suggest. And here I've selected one of the orange-brown colors from inside the portal, and I'm just softly brushing it into the water because hopefully that light would catch in the water. In layers, I go back to the plant that I have right there on layer 11, and I just want to smudge this harsh edge just a touch. I just feel like it's a little too distracting. Now in layers, I'm going to layer 11, which is where we use this like creamsicle color, but it's on the add blending mode. So we get this really bright vibrancy that I'm going to try and use to just further push the lighting and establish the intensity of the portal light as well as the light coming from above. When I like the way this looks, I do go in with the smudge tool and just soften up some of the line work that I've just done. Next, I'm going to go into my layers again and to the layer 12, that is the flooring, as I call it. I'm also going to add this darker side of the water because, well, there's going to be shadows in water and darker parts of the water like anything else. And I just want to make sure that I'm adding that color variation. I do smudge it in so that it looks a bit more natural. Under my layers, I'm going to layer 10, which is the topmost layer that has the add blending mode on, and I select one of the very bright minty teal colors. And now I'm just tapping in using the artistic Aurora brush so I can start to establish some parts of these trees where the lighting really hits the leaves. And I'm just gently smudging some of it so that it doesn't have too harsh of a line, but so that the suggestion of leaves is still there. Under layers, selecting layer 9, I add a layer on top of that, which is now layer 17, put that on the add blending mode. And under organic, I'm going to select cotton. I just want to add a bit more texture and a bit more vibrancy to the tree details in the background. Once I have that established, I do bring layer 17 down so that it is just above layer 2. I take the opacity down and combine layer 3 with layer 17. Here are a few areas that we still need to work on. And I go to the floor, which is layer 12 or the ground, and that is where I want to add a bit more texture, and we'll continue to work it up. But right now I want to add some darker hues and texture right here in the front. So we really get a sense of it being shadowed and darker the further away we get from the portal light as well as the beaming light at the top of the painting. Now I'm going to grab one of the lighter teal colors, and I'm just going to paint in the suggestion of, just some areas where the light might catch just a touch. I'm also going to add in some green to the more bluish teal color so that we can start tying in the moss painted areas like the top of the archway or the moss that's growing on the rock face. We can really start to push that green color where the light from the portal starts to reflect on the moss as well as other parts of the forest. But we'll keep reworking the moss and the colors around it until we like the way that it looks. But right now we're just really establishing sort of where the light would hit or catch. In layers, on layer 11, where we were doing the add blend mode specific to the portal, we are going to select the Rainforest Amended brush with the texture and add some more to the forest floor here so we can start to really get a sense of pushing this light and just how much the portal light impacts the forest around it. Once that's done, I am going into layer 11 and adding a new layer above it. I am selecting that Paper Daisy brush once again under Organic, and I'm going to brush in the suggestion of plants here with a plant silhouette, and I'm going to resize and reshape it until I like how it rests. Now that that's established, select the smudge tool, go into Artistic and the Aurora brush, and now I can soften up some of these leaves down at the bottom. This layer, known as layer 17 right now, is going to be on alpha lock, and we're going to select that teal color that we have in the background and be sure that you are on the Paper Daisy brush still so that we can continue to keep the continuity of the brush but also adding color without it going outside the lines of that particular plant shape. Also adding in green as I did on the other side, and I'm also going to add in some of this lighter teal color in the Aurora brush so that it looks like the light is catching on certain parts of the leaves. I also end up adding in dark colors again with the Aurora brush to add some additional shadows. And I also grab the orange color, make it a bit darker in the brown range, and add some of that into the front leaves so that we can see, and we also do it to the other side, so we can see how the portal light again is interactive with the actual magic forest that we're in that leads to another magical forest through the portal. I end up combining the plant layers now, so they're all on one layer together. Layer 11, I move above the other layer 11. However, this one is the add blend mode one, and we're actually going in and erasing where the light was painted before that we don't need or we need to repaint. So I also do down here. And on this add blending mode layer, we're going to choose a orange or a creamsicle type color and go into the hard airbrush and try and push the lighting here so that it looks like it's catching on the leaves. For the backside, I select layer 10, which is also a add blending mode layer, but it has more of the mint highlights, whereas the portal layer has the yellow highlights of the portal color. This one is like the highlights of the teal color above us, the mint color above us. I also end up deciding to push the light just a little bit on the tree trunks here. I do end up selecting this like mossy green and just punch up the green a bit sliding it closer to the blue but still in the green range. And on layer 11, which are the plants with the alpha lock still on, I add in just a few of these Aurora brush like leaves. They're not leaves, but I call them leaves because this is what I use for leaves. Now I'm going to add a layer above 11, which makes it another 17. And while I do want the plants to all be on the same layer, when I am painting it and I'm not sure how it's going to look, I want it on its own layer before I combine it with the other plants. So that's why I have this on its own layer right now, but I will eventually combine it with the other plants. Now I'm going to put layer 17 on alpha lock like I did the other plants, and I'm going to select the darker color teal that we were working in and just tap it in to get some leaf variation and suggestion. I also select some of the greens that we've been using. And just like the other plants, we're grabbing the darker color and tapping it in to create more shadow and just working until we like the way that the leaves are looking. Now I've combined the plants all into one layer. I still have it on alpha lock so that way the the bush that I'm currently working on is the only layer receiving color. I take off alpha lock. I select this particular bush that is not touching anything else, and I go to Gaussian blur. Because it's closer to us, sort of like a photo, I want this part to be out of focus. Now we need to add lighting. So I am going to add another layer, which ends up becoming layer 17. Under the brush library, I go into the airbrush, and now I'm going to paint some details of lighting catching on these leaves. Now that I am satisfied with the way that it looks, I use the Gaussian blur to soften up the edges so that the lighting itself is also blurred in the foreground. Going into layers, I select layer 6, which is the arch, and I add a layer, which ends up being layer 17 again. And here is where I'm going to create a silhouette that suggests plants are growing up the sides of the archway. So I'm going to have some vines and some various leaves, but I also just don't want them to be too overwhelming. So I really try and make the details subtle and fine. Now I want to add some highlights. So on top of layer 17, I add a layer which now becomes layer 18. Aren't we lucky? And I put it on the add blend mode, and I select the creamsicle-ish colors for the highlight. And now I'm just adding some highlights on the vines. We're getting really close to the end here, guys. You're doing great. If you're still here, whew, you're a trooper. Okay, on layer 10, the layer with all the vibrancy of the mint. Now we're going to use the hard airbrush. We're going to start painting in just some of the more vibrant, brighter spots of this waterfall in the background. The lines are not perfect, I know. So we're going to go and smudge it using the twig brush. Now on layer called from selection, putting that on alpha lock, it's the mist on the right hand side. We're going to use a darker green and a softer airbrush, and we're just going to darken up some of the mist on the side. Selecting layer 11, which are the plants, we're going to add a new layer on top of it. And this layer, we're going to use a black and start painting in some stone steps that lead to said portal. Now that we have our steps, we're going up to layer 11 with the add on the add blending mode and erase where it's overlapping with these steps, and just getting rid of that texture. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to the ground layer, layer 12 here, where I need to build in color around the stones. So I go to Rainforest Brush, the amended one, and start creating some moss and greenery and, you know, just different types of ground. Now I'm going to head back into my layers any minute now. Select layer 19, which is the black stone steps. Select the back 3, and I'm going to use Gaussian blur just to soften them up a bit. Again, I want it to kind of be like photo-esque, where the foreground is out of focus and the main focus is drawing the eye to that portal. I put layer 19 on Alpha Lock, which are the stone steps, and now I am going to draw in their texture and color. So I make sure I deselect the selection and start coloring in some of the stones. So then I want to make sure underneath the stone on layer 20 that I choose a rather dark teal, staying on the rainforest brush. And this I'm going to use, I even make it a little darker. This I end up using as the shadow. So that way we know like the light's hitting these and it's casting a small shadow. These stones are not entirely flat, okay? They got a little bit of depth to them. This is the point where I go back into layer 19, which are the original stone steps, and I take the smudge tool and I end up softening up those back edges. Um, don't use the twig brush. Use the airbrush. There we go, the medium blend. You could use really any of them, but I liked the medium blend. And I'm just softening up the edges because they were just too harsh, too harsh. It's also at this point that I find I need to put the shadows on multiply, and I take the opacity down a touch, but I needed them darker. I needed it darker. Back to layer 19, I add a layer on top, which now makes it 21, and I make that a clipping mask. And that's because I want this to be the layer that I add some of the orange in on top of the sort of cooler blue teal we've been using. I want that brown to catch on these stone steps. Now I'm going up to layer 11, which is our layer that we've been using for the portal lighting with the add blend mode, and we're going to use that to really give a pop of vibrancy and light really hitting the edges of these stone steps. Also, just for funsies, I end up trying this lime green just to see what would happen. And I go back to my creamsicle color, still in add blending mode. Takes me several tries and attempts, but eventually I figure out what brush I want, which is the airbrush. hard blend mode, take down the size, and this is where I'm just gonna add a little suggestion of, you know, grass, nature. Still on that same layer, I'm going to select the reinforced brush and I'm going to use that here to help me establish more of a delineation from the hill there and the path that we want leading to the portal. Then I go down to layer 12, which is my forest floor, and I start painting in more of the colors I want to see and really push. In this case, that's the lime green. Holding down and selecting the orange-brown colors, I start also brushing those into the lime green that I just added. We do want there to be that suggestion of that portal light seeping into the areas around the forest. I am also taking out some of the intensity of this lighting that I had added earlier on one of the blend modes. And now, going back to the forest floor, this is where I'm going to add in some lime green moss instead. So it's still picking up light, but it's just not that stark line of light. I add a little bit of yellow just to really push how much that portal light is beaming off of the tree bark. Selecting layer 18, which is on the add blending mode, I utilize this layer to add additional highlights and push the light from the portal onto the ground of the forest floor here. I end up smudging using the rainforest to just soften up some of those edges so the lines don't look so intentionally painted and look a little bit more natural. Heading back into my layers, I select layer 6, which is the arch of the portal. I choose a really vibrant green that I just feel like we need to see more of to really push the lighting here. And I'm using the organic rainforest brush, as I did before, for this moss texture. I continue to try and push this lighting, remembering to vary up where this lighting catches because we don't want it to be too overwhelming in one area. We really, I mean, in nature, right, there's going to be the cast of shadow and where light catches. So that's what we're really going for here. This is also the point where I want to bring in more of this like minty blue. Really push that lighting here as well. Now I want to do the add blending mode. So I'm going up to layer 10, which is where a good portion of the bright highlights are coming from, which is here. I'm just continuing to build up the area. We're getting close to done here. We're just doing some final details. So now we're going to pick the like dark medium, dark, just kidding, dark color. We're going to go into the charcoal and the charcoal brush at the bottom. On layer 21, we're making it a clipping mask right above the layer of, I think it's layer 6, of this arch, and I'm just trying to establish sort of texture to suggest their stone. And then I also want to choose this brown and have it start to, I don't like the way that brush ends up looking, the burnt tree brush. So I do end up going into the organics and picking the clay, I think it is. I'm sorry, it's so hard for me to see when I'm editing. And I'm just trying to get this suggestion of the stone and it catching light, but not overdoing it. I do take the opacity down and then combine the layers. We're almost there, guys. On a new layer, layer 21. On airbrush, I'm going to use this to just further push the light and the suggestion of it hitting the stone here. And now this is my favorite part. It's the finishing details. On a new layer, layer 22, I make it almost white, but it's still in that really vibrant minty color. I go into elements, and there I find my driven snow brush. I change the blending mode to add, and this is where the magic literally starts to happen. Once I like where those are, I go in and select the creamsicle color and just add some of this lighting as well around the portal. Now on a new layer, also making it an add, I am making sure I pick like a green, more green than anything, but it's more green mint. Under the luminance brush set, I select glimmer and I reset the brush because mine had been altered. And I am going to show you how I make the adjustments. So I want it quite spaced out. I want the jitter very large. And I also want the jitter size here to be significant, around 75%. And then I take down much of the color variation, hit done. And now you can see sort of what the brush looks like when you tap. Look at that magic. I want these glowing pieces to really sit in the painting, so I do go to the layer 12, which is the ground. I add a layer above it, which ends up being layer 24. And under airbrush, I pick a medium airbrush, and I use that to start a glow, but then I realize it needs texture if it's going to be resting on the grass. So I do end up going into the amended rainforest brush. And then I build up the intensity of this color resting on this grass or catching in the lighting of the grass. I do put it on add so that I can really push the lighting here. I don't want to overdo it, and I want to make sure that some of the areas are perhaps just a bit more highlighted than others to show just the natural inconsistencies of nature, and also show the depth of how close or how far away some of these little, I don't know, fairy lights, fireflies might be. And there we have it, guys. We did it. We made it to the end. If you are by some miracle still here, thank you so much for watching and for supporting my channel. I really hope that this tutorial was helpful to you. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, engage, and I'll see you guys soon.